Katie Lafalcia. Welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. This is part 3 of our book, Glimpses of Other Realities by Moulton, Howe. Video 1 was crop circles. Video 2 was animal mutilations. And this video 3 is human abduction and eyewitnesses. Now, I'm going to fully admit that I didn't copy down every word of every story because, for one thing, they're enormously similar. It gets almost tedious. They're so similar. For another thing, we've read about these in their original sources by the experiencers who wrote books, by the people who interviewed them. And, we don't need to belabor the point because these are early reports of abductions. We know a lot more about them now, I think, and the nature of them has changed. In fact, they have virtually stopped. Their abductions, they've done whatever it is that they planned on doing, apparently, because they're not hearing reports anymore. Okay, this is the beginning of the chapter where she lists some interesting facts. Since the 60s, hundreds of people have complained of missing time events, often associated with unidentified bright lights, in which minutes to hours are inexplicably lost from a person's life. The phenomenon has come to be known as the UFO abduction syndrome. A 1992 Roper survey about unusual personal experiences of people in the United States suggested to some analysts that perhaps 2% of the population have experienced the UFO abduction syndrome. Anomalous trauma victim is a phrase sometimes used by psychiatrists, psychologists, and other mental health professionals to describe patients who report experiences with odd lights and missing time. Often, people report disturbing memories of non-human beings that perform physical examinations and extract human tissue, fluid, sperm, or ova. Non-human entities seen in broad daylight have been reported in the United States by a Waco, Texas rancher, a farm couple in Missouri, a mother and son in New Mexico, a boy in Georgia, and in many other countries. Well, let's not forget the cop in New Mexico. Animals alive or dead are sometimes reported by anomalous trauma victims who either see animals in glass cages as if on exhibit, or see them hooked up to tubes and wires as if being tested, or see the same excised body parts that have been reported missing from worldwide animal mutilations. So this chapter begins with a quotation. The Roper survey conducted between July and September of 91 suggests that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of American men, women, and children may have experienced UFO abductions or abduction-related phenomena. That's from Dr. John Mack, professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. This was before he died. Okay. Mutilations and abductions the reports began around the same time in the 1960s. There's the famous story of the interrupted journey of Betty and Barney Hill, who were in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And they were driving home one night because they were trying to outrun a storm that was coming. They had been up in Canada. And in a very remote section of road in the mountains, they saw something in the sky. And I think it saw them. And long story short, they later, after suffering mental distress and interrupted sleep and nightmares and they went to a doctor and were put under hypnosis and told the story of being stopped on the road and by a UFO and taken into it and medically medically tested by these alien beings. And Betty claimed she was going to be given a book by one of them, but then His boss said no. She was shown a star map that she was able to draw, and nobody could figure out anything about it until a different woman who liked to solve those sorts of puzzles realized that it was, I think, Sirius. It was a constellation that we see looking up at the sky. It was the same constellation, but shown from the other side. Things about it that we didn't know yet. They went to a psychiatrist, and the diagnosis was an emotional disturbance created by an experience with a UFO. Even the psychiatrist was convinced. In 1991, Dr. John Mack did a big survey. Now, he was famous for winning the Pulitzer Prize for his book on Lawrence of Arabia. And he went on to be a big shot in psychiatry, a tenured professor at Harvard School of Medicine, and very well respected in the field. And somebody, I want to say Bud Hopkins came to him, knew him, but I may be off there. This all is just somewhere in the back of my brain. But he was approached and asked to do a consultation with one and then more and then many people who claimed abduction experiences. They were very troubled by them, needless to say. And other psychiatrists had either misdiagnosed them or ridiculed them or rejected them or dismissed them completely. So they were desperate. And they went to Dr. Mack, and he was a very compassionate person. And he listened to them. And he started keeping a record of all these different cases and was astounded by the similarities. And he got all philosophical about the whole thing, which I think is the most interesting part of his story, is he was willing to entertain the notion that, maybe we don't have all the answers and maybe there's a larger force at play. Maybe there's something more to consciousness. And in his survey, we did a formal one of thousands, if not millions, he extrapolated from the people that he interviewed, have had some sort of trauma. He called it an anomalous trauma syndrome. And it included a story of abduction, a move towards isolation afterwards, a sense of a shattered reality, and also reports of unpredictable recurrences of the same traumatic abduction experience. He also reported that some of these people, they talked about floating through walls on a beam of light and finding themselves escorted by little gray beings onto what they described as a spaceship. They didn't have words for it often. And often these things looked small from the outside but were gigantic on the inside. Go figure that out. And they would describe similar environments, not always identical, but similar environments where they were brought into what looked like, like a medical examining room or an operating room. And there were descriptions of equipment built into the walls that sound very much like computer screens. And they interacted, these little gray beings, with them very much as we would interact with the touch screen. But we're talking early 1960s. Those things were, the outer limits. And they were medically examined, and it was very traumatic for them both, invasive and embarrassing and terrifying. But Betty seemed to have a better time processing what was happening to them. Barney just, it was very traumatic for him. Betty remembered more about it and had conversations with a couple of these beings, and it was telepathic. And as I said, they showed her a map, which she was able to reproduce under hypnosis. And she asked for proof, and the friendly one gave her a book. But then on the way out, the boss said, oh, no, 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 you can't take that with you. And then, of course, they had their anxiety difficulties and sought help and ended up, doing the circuit, actually, talking about this openly. It took them a very long time to be willing to talk about it openly. Other experiencers saw slightly different things. The same experience, essentially, sort of an alien operating room and medical experiments, medical tests done on them, and same description of weird beings. But some reported seeing animals in cages, glass cages, being experimented on. We won't go into it. And later on, people reported babies in cylinders of liquid, weird gel liquid, at various stages of development. And then later yet, people reported being shown these infants after birth. So in May of 1973, a family of 5 in Texas were abducted, the whole family, and had lost time. And later they all had symptoms of PTSD. And under hypnosis, separately from each other, the same story came out. And they reported seeing animals, even an 1,800-pound bull lifted up into the sky on a beam of light. And one of them was able to draw a picture of the alien face they had seen. And this is not the traditional gray. This is a different one that looked a little bit more like a very skinny stick figure person, but with like an ant-like face. They saw animals got taken up and mutilated and brought back down. So maybe there was no blood because it didn't happen there. That was not the original scene of the crime. They were abducted and taken to a second location, which Oprah recommends you never allow to happen to you. The woman of this family had her children tested, and one of them, who's now 22, agreed to be hypnotized. And the stories all meshed, even though this daughter who was hypnotized was a total skeptic before the session. She didn't remember anything about it until hypnosis. They described the typical medical exam and the small gray alien, also the ant-like face. The daughter reported being in a room being examined and seeing her mother through a big long glass window in the wall, screaming and pounding at the window. She said that the creatures with her were businesslike and efficient and brusque. They didn't really relate to her on any kind of an emotional level. And under hypnosis, she said that she was put into a state of amnesia, but she doesn't know how after all this happened. And there are in the book many, many, many strange eyewitness reports that are familiar to all of us because we've done them before. A horse farmer and his son at night saw a small gray suited entity with a clear bubble over his head at their pasture gate. And they both saw it. They said, look at that. That's a guy with a bubble on his head. And it just disappeared. It dematerialized. He and his wife later saw a disc over the pasture, and the next day found 5 dead horses. In 1983 in Missouri, a couple saw 2 beings working on a cow, doing something to a cow in the field, and the cow appeared to be paralyzed. And what they saw next was the cow rising up into the sky and going into a cone-shaped craft. It didn't go all the way up into the atmosphere and be gone. It rose up off the ground, is a better way to put it. Rose up off the ground and then into this craft parked next to the field. They saw a green lizard-like man at the door, and next to the craft, a creature that they described looked like a Bigfoot, And all of them went inside with the cow, and then the craft did go up into the sky and disappear. And they told the owner of the cow, which was missing, but he didn't believe them. And now I'm going to show you some of the pictures that they drew independently of each other. This is Linda with the mother and daughter when the daughter was 22 and willing to be hypnotized to tell the story. This is what the father and son saw at the gate. And this is the horse in relationship to the weird thing in the field. Now this is the scenario, the cone-shaped UFO, the weird lizard guy, Bigfoot, and them working on the cow. And we've done a couple books on Bigfoot, and if you've listened to those videos, you'll remember that orbs and lights, UFO sightings, Bigfoot, often seen around the same time. And here's a close-up of what that cone-shaped thing looked like. And finally, here he is, Sasquatch. Very strange. Okay. So the owner of the cow that disappeared didn't believe them. And this couple who saw all this had hypnosis. And they found out that they had actually been abducted a couple of days before the whole mutilated missing cow thing. In 1980 in Texas, a rancher saw 2 4-foot green creatures carrying a calf, and 3 days later, they found the calf on the ground mutilated. In 1980 in New Mexico, a woman and a 5-year-old saw 2 beings working on a cow in a pasture. The cow seemed to be in pain, and she yelled at these beings to stop because she wasn't sure, who they were, like weird kids or whatever. And she and her son were suddenly approached by 2 bright lights and taken to an underground facility. The son remembered afterwards. The mother was in a state of extreme amnesia. Under hypnosis, she reported a physical exam in which ova were removed. She saw strange humanoids in a vat of bloody liquid. She saw stick beings as reported by the other people, and beings with snake-like eyes. She felt like they were trying to control the earth. One abductee was told the ETs were monitoring the environment because it would affect them too. That sounds more common. They were concerned about the survival of all in the universe. Early on, there was speculation, is this a hybridization program? Reports of babies in tubes and pregnancies disappearing and women later being shown hybrid children. But why excise parts of animals and leave them when they could just easily take the whole thing and dispose of it? And she suggests, is this a message to us? And she asks, what are the motives? And different abductees think different motives. Many abductees got tested for their sanity. And we're fine, by the way. Except for the obvious PTSD of having gone through this once you remember. That's, pretty horrifying. There's no real evidence, but many witnesses from around the globe tell a similar story. And in John Mack's book, he talks about this. He talks about the possible psychological processes in play here. And I don't remember, it's been so long, I can't remember the notions he toyed with. But eventually, he thought this was something bigger than just people having a common, like the Salem witch situation, where it started out maybe as sort of a mass hysteria kind of thing. He said he didn't think that that was what was going on, having spent a lot of time interviewing them as a psychiatrist. He didn't see that that's what was going on. Then there's a description of Gray from a woman who was taken at the age of 5 in 1958. So that's really a long time ago. First, let me show you this picture because this is really interesting. This is a picture of a hybridized baby and a hybridized young child. That's the baby. That's the young child. Now, this picture is what the woman remembered under hypnosis as a 5-year-old. This writing is so small. Gray skin, black eyes. No, she was a 4-year-old. And her brother also was taken, and he speculated were these androids. A lot of people say this, that these all seem remarkable. Are they clones or androids or some sort of bio-android mix, cyborg, that they look identical. There's different types of them, and they look slightly different from each other, but there are numbers of them that are identical. And are they clones or are they manufactured? What the heck is it? So, where am I here? Different ETs are described, and they communicated with people, but they communicated by telepathy. Here's another picture of one that was described as being somewhat like an insect, a praying mantis. And then this here is the face of the lizard guy. And this woman has had physical encounters with this green-skinned, yellow-eyed creature with an intensely cold stare. How'd you like to wake up and see him in the corner of your room? God. Okay. So now we're going to talk about other beings. This is chapter 4, Other Beings. Let me read this first. This is a little entry on telepathic communication. The Greys are variable. They're manufactured replicates which serve as workers, decoys, lab keepers, and envoys. There are also communicators who assist in the calming of test subjects as well as attempts in communication with the individual. Now, this is coming from the reporting of an experiencer. The praying mantis types are the ancients. They're a rare branch of the same species, the great mother of many species. Supervisor of exploration and research, purity of the species is extinct. The genetic ancestry is passed on in hybridization of compatible bipeds. The reptilians are sentries and workers. The species are treated, they have a treaty, in other words, with the Greys as a combined workforce within the craft. So these different types of entities work together. Reptilians are not as intellectually complex, but have great body strength and warrior ancestry. The reptilians are what your dinosaurs would be had they survived the global upheaval and evolved as planned. Oh, God. And then one of the experiencers says, my own feelings are that there are some Greys who never have any telepathic contact. They seem automatic. There's usually one who communicates and the others do exams and so forth. My experience with praying mantis type was seeing one that watched over everything. I got a feeling of great age, an impression of royalty almost, like she presided over everybody. The Nordic blondes have been among your people for many thousands of years. Their early settlements on your world gave them the opportunity to create a lasting coexistence with the humans. They are your early ancestors. Because of this implantation, they can work and study your kind with little fear of detection. Their goals are different from ours. Now, this is what one telepathic alien is communicating. His type, must use your genetics to reproduce. The blonde ones have maintained their sexual abilities. They're more concerned with your spiritual evolvement. They are of an emotional, more gentle race. Their nature baffles us as much as the unrestrained emotional behavior of humans. However, we coexist together in the study of your people, many times contacting the same individuals who are the subjects of study. Over and over, I mean. Several of the telepathic communications you have received are from the blonde ones. They share the knowledge of communication through the biological transceivers. You will know which type of message has come from our kind. We prefer to share the more technological implications of our contact. And this is stuff that's been given to this woman experiencer, Jean Robinson. The blonde ones will answer the inquiries that concern spiritual understanding as it relates to universal concepts. These Nordics have told some of your kind that they're from the Pleiades. They originate from this region but prefer secrecy as to the specific location in their solar system. In case you wander into their neighborhood, they don't want any unexpected visitors. About the animal mutilations, the telepathic thoughts continued. We use substances from cows in an essential biochemical process for our survival. The material we use from cattle contains the correct amount of protein substances needed for biochemical absorption. While we respect all life, some sacrifices must be made for the preservation of other species. In most instances, your people do not grieve over dead cows as they do over dogs or dead people. Anyway, just kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. So ET experiences, wait a minute, I'm skipping something important here. Okay, this is about the other beings now. My notes sort of skipped around a little bit. So this is the fact page that she collated. Beings other than human, tall and short, have been painted, carved, or sculpted centuries ago in canyons, caves, and statues in parts of the world as diverse as the American Southwest, Peru, Australia, the Middle East, and Europe. Eyes are often depicted as much larger than human eyes, and heads are often much larger or longer than normal human scale. And this, I'm sure, from Utah will look familiar. The mysterious Sumerians, as far back as 4,000 to 5,000 BC, had sophisticated mathematics and had evolved the oldest known wedge-shaped cuneiform script from primitive hieroglyphics. The skeletons from the royal cemetery at Ur had very large, long, and narrow skulls. Large noses were another notable Sumerian feature. The gods who interacted closely and physically with the Sumerians were depicted as very tall, with huge eyes and domed-shaped heads that were covered with ropey or ribbed headdresses. The Bible, in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, states that after the creation of humankind in the Garden of Eden, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. The prophet Ezekiel in the Bible's Old Testament, Ezekiel 1, verses 4 to 7, described encountering a round ball of orange light, fire enfolding itself, from which 4 unidentified creatures emerged that had the likeness of man, but their feet were straight like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. The UFO abduction syndrome in the modern age has produced reported encounters with non-human beings in broad daylight, both tall and short, that most often have large black eyes or eyes like a snake or a cat with vertical pupils. Some people have described legs that run into straight feet more like hooves, like in Ezekiel. Other humanoid beings, tall and short, have been described by abductees as glowing or surrounded by light. So let's go over some of these experiences. Some experiencers and some researchers agree that communication and physical contact have been ongoing for years. Some say in one form or another for millennia, as these ancient cave drawings and Sumerian art, etc., would show. SETI, the Society for Sending Out Sounds to Try to Communicate, their funding got cut and they didn't have any results, but many say that ETs have been here and interacting a long time, and it has been said that the reason that they're not getting the contact in electronic ways, I guess electronic, technological ways, is because they're not doing it right. They're not looking for the right kind of signal. It's like trying to listen to the radio and you're not tuned into the right station. Eyewitnesses insist that they've seen non-human beings. And this seems like overstating the obvious at this point, but remember when the book was first written, nobody talked about this much. So for her to come out and write a book like this was pretty brave. In August 92, in Salem, Oregon, hang on a second here, a woman alone saw a green-gray alien walk into her kitchen. And she looked at it, and then it just disappeared. It dematerialized. Later that day, a 12-inch length of an arm with 3 fingers on a hand appeared, just disembodied, touched her, and disappeared again. And the spot where it touched her felt like an electric shock. This hand had no nails. There was no body attached to the arm. And later, she had a pinpoint of red with a white area around it, and it's still there. There was no pain, but it was still there. And this is a picture of what she saw. And she said that the skin had a pebbly texture, like some of those, those bags you can buy, purses. Yeah. Where am I? Some insist that these smaller beings are androids, workers, like we talked about. There are ones that are greener, and she asks a very interesting question. Is it possible that they're greener because they've got some sort of chemical thing going on with chlorophyll? And allegedly, government autopsy says yes. Now, Linda Moulton Howe has been doing this for years and years, and she's got connections and she has sources. So, of anyone who reports on this, I would believe her. So she's heard from dozens of people around the world about these stories. And she says, more significantly, she's heard from many off-the-record military and intelligence sources who cannot, because of non-disclosure or, confidentiality, top secret stuff, or will not because they're afraid of losing their pension or their position if they're still working, being ridiculed, losing their professional, respect. Won't talk to anybody. They've talked to her because they trust her. So we talked about a screen memory. I always forget the full term. It's a screen memory. And this is false recall of an object or an animal or an event to cover for the actual experience that you're having. And as I said, a lot of people, many different incidents report an owl. And later on, I think the significant thing about that is the big eyes. Later on, they'll go under hypnosis and find out they were looking at an ET, a gray. It wasn't an owl. And as I said before, others will remember some kind of police blockade when really what's parked in the center of the road is not the cops. it's ETs and a UFO. But it's been told to people that it's been done out of consideration for people's mental well-being, because a lot of people who go through this would be severely damaged if they remembered it right away or could not forget it right away. And these screen memories help to protect them from the memories of what really happened. But they get to a point where they need to know, and they undergo hypnosis, and your subconscious won't allow you to remember what you can't handle. And so if they remember it, they're ready to handle it. And it's actually been pretty helpful for most of the people who do remember it, who go through hypnosis. Then there was a teenage girl from Texas, and she saw an ET, interacted with an ET, that had this really strange head. Where is this? So she said it was kind of like the head was shaped like a brain. It wasn't a brain on the outside. It was it had some kind of skin over it. It was bald. But it was shaped like a brain. And it was brown and spotted like a mushroom. So I'm going to cover the other picture because I don't want to spoil the fun. So this is her freehand drawing of what she saw. What's so interesting is, this is another picture drawn by the famous mystery guy, Aleister Crowley. Look at the similarity. This is the one that Aleister Crowley drew. Now, Aleister Crowley founded the Order of the Golden Dawn, and it's the inner mystery school of Theosophy that we talked about 2 weeks ago. Isn't it interesting how that happens? Now, this weird creature that Aleister Crowley drew identified himself to Aleister Crowley as I am. And if you remember, the 3 circles connected by a triangle crop circle is recognized as the Yod I am. That's all I can say. So Crowley claims to have met I am while astral traveling, and he received a lot of information from this creature through telepathy. The guy told him about Shambhala in the Himalayas, and there are stories connected to that, and stories this brainhead guy told Aleister Crowley about intelligent beings who live underground, with us right now, living underground. Anyway, they look remarkably similar, and let me show you. 1919, 1973. It really is uncanny. Under hypnosis, this teenage girl told various types of ETs were working together on the ship. And that's been reported, as we just talked about, that they have some kind of an agreement, a treaty. And so they have different goals, but they do the same job together to achieve those different goals. And she was told that there are many dimensional realities that exist, as we know from the Hermetic philosophy we read, and that each of these dimensions is inhabited by various kinds of beings. So she goes on to describe some of these beings in more detail. Now, this is going to be a little bit redundant because we've talked about this so often before, but there are pictures, so you know. One of the first types would be the small grays, and they have no hair. They wear leotard-like bodysuits and have patches. They have big eyes and pointy chins. They're often seen, if they're seen at all, gathering samples outside of UFOs, helping to get cows lifted up into a beam of light. And there are a couple of different kinds of them. One is more robust than the other. One is small and very thin. Their hands can be different. They can have 3 fingers or 4 fingers or 5 fingers. So there's some difference there. And they are somewhat android-like. Now this is the small pale one, and they have patches on their suits. Although I've read about them that are all gray all the way, and they can't tell, is it a suit or is it just their skin? They can't tell. It's another kind, slightly different. And then this is the whole bunch of them alike. So are they androids? Are they clones? Hard to say. I hope you can see that. This book is so big I can't see the screen and hold the book up at the same time. Then there are taller grays, and they also have no hair. And some of them, and this is interesting, wear colored capes, which I'll show you in a second. So here's the variations on a theme here. Here's a smaller one. Here's a taller one. He's not wearing a tall cape collar. There's a better example of the taller ones. Here's some with the cape. They're pretty creepy looking. Look at that. And their faces, keep in mind, not everybody's an artist. And people remember things slightly differently, but you can see the similarities. You'll see that this one, get this right. This one has more of ridges on the face than this one, but if you look really closely, this one does have ridges on the face. And these guys with the collars sometimes wear long robes, and they seem to be in charge of the smaller ones. So that's a little team there. And then this one's really pretty. Whoever drew this had a good eye for color. And they do look kind of, I don't know, bossy. And then there's a bunch that are more like they're in charge, but they're kind of like the medical officers. And they have kind of a different sort of insignia thing. They do the medical exams. This is a picture of one of the insignia, and this is a close-up of the face. The next type that they describe are, oh wait, let me continue to show you some of these faces because they are really disturbing. All these are drawings of experiencers, and some of them from memory, some of them in hypnosis. It does not, I'm not doing a very good job of holding that still. What is that? Oh, he's looking sideways. Do you see that? His head's tilted. Okay. So, yikes. This is described as cat eyes and very large noses. They're kind of taller and more humanoid, but they don't have any hair. They can be as much as 6 feet tall. No, 6 to 8 feet tall. They don't have any hair. They have the big noses and the cat eyes. But then we have some that have hair. So here's these are more like the Nordics kind of, but they have hair and they have cat eyes, so they don't look entirely human, but they're humanoid. Oh, it's like Mr. Spock. And there's that scary guy again. Here's another. And then in contrast, he shows a drawing of somebody who did a drawing of an alien, and then the depiction of a Sumerian from ancient Sumer. They are alarmingly similar. It's kind of eerie. There was a meeting at Kirkland Air Force Base in 1983. She was told about it by Air Force Special Agent Richard Doty. And it was part of Project Sigma. And in this project, at this meeting at Kirkland Air Force Base, U.S. government people met with ETs. And this has been ongoing ever since. It had been prearranged with the military and some scientists at Holloman Air Force Base. It was going to happen at Holloman Air Force Base. So there was an initial meeting at Kirkland, and then the aliens came. So he showed how drawings based on photos and videos taken by the Department of Defense. And he actually made a documentary about this. What page was this? So, in the context of this meeting, she talks a little bit about Assyrian history. And the Sumerians were described as looking like early Egyptians, but they weren't Egyptians. And according to archaeology and Arthur Keith in El Albiad, they've done studies, DNA studies, and they found that these Sumerians who were not Egyptian but looked Egyptian are genetically related to the English Long Barrows people. English. Sumerian, Egyptian, English. All from the far distant past. And Sumerian knowledge was so technical that it would have had to come from many generations of development. For example, they did very advanced metallurgy. Let me show you before we go there. I guess I did show you all the pictures. Okay. I thought I skipped a picture. So we have this little tidbit. Herodotus. If you've never read Herodotus, it's well worth it. He's often considered like the earliest traveling historian. He did travelogues of all the places he went. He describes some unfortunate guy with a cart in Egypt, and I believe it was Alexandria, who accidentally ran over a cat. Cats were sacred in Egypt, and he was killed by the mob for running over a cat. So I would remember something like that. Anyway, Herodotus, the famous Greek historian of the 5th century BC, described the shrine on top of Babylon's ziggurat built for the god Marduk, and said that it contained a great golden couch on which a human woman spent the night alone, suggesting perhaps a sexual liaison with the god. Ancient Near East language scholar and author Zecharia Sitchin has concluded from his translation work that the Sumerian gods were an advanced extraterrestrial civilization that eons ago had used genetic manipulation in already evolving primates to create primitive workers to mine and do other physical labor on this planet. Later, through subsequent genetic manipulation of primitive Homo sapiens by those gods, the Sumerian culture evolved in an interactive relationship with the gods. Archaeologist Woolley remarks about the unusual relationship between the Sumerian community and their gods. While terrifyingly aloof, the gods were at the same time particularly close to man. The religion was anthropomorphic. Human characteristics were ascribed to the gods, and the gods were but men writ large. The ziggurat temples were their houses in the city's midst, and the gods were eating the meat of sacrifice of which their worshippers also partook. The fact is that throughout the religion of the Sumerians, it's one not of love but of fear. Fear whose limits are confined to this present life. Fear of beings all-powerful, capricious, unmoral. And look at this. This is a Sumerian god statue. I should point out, this one is holding what they interpret to be a child with an elongated head. And these guys had high domed heads, and I'll show you in a second. And like I said, their metallurgy was so advanced that they would have had a lot of time to develop it. It didn't just pop up. They had high domed heads, and I'll show you pictures of that. And it's not just because they're wearing domed hats, because they do show stuff with them. They're bare skulls. Okay. In a book by Robert Temple, did you remember Temple? We read his book, if I'm not mistaken, because I lent it to somebody. The New Science of Heaven. I think that was Dr. Robert Temple. Well, early on, he's in this book, so he's been at it hard for a long time, and he studied the Dogon people in Africa. In his book, he describes how Dogon priests told French anthropologists Marcel Graul and Germain Deterlin that the starting point of creation is the star which revolves around Sirius and contains the germs of all things. Its movement on its own axis and around Sirius upholds all creation in space. The Dogon priests said the small second star revolved around Sirius every 50 years. The French anthropologists footnoted their research, quote, "The question has not been solved nor even asked of how men with no instruments at their disposal could know the movements and certain characteristics of stars which are scarcely visible." Not only are they scarcely visible, they weren't identified until they had telescopes. And these people were talking about it much earlier. Okay, let's see here. So Temple wrote the book, The Sirius Mystery. He's a Sanskrit scholar. And he connected them and the Dogon. He connected the Dogon to Sirius, aliens from Sirius, which we just read about. The ancients knew about Sirius 3 millennia before it was first realized with a telescope built in 1862. It was invisible to the eye. How did they know about it? Temple asks, were primitive stone men handed civilization on a platter by ETs? It's a big statement to make. So then we have another type of humanoid that has red hair. I read in the National Enquirer, if you have red hair, you're probably alien. I was pretty excited about that. So these tall humanoids with red hair, Howe had heard about them in Peru. They're pale with red hair and blue eyes, and they can be as tall as 8 feet. She spoke with an archaeological student in Peru whose father was a traveling nurse and claimed to have seen them. He was in a village in 81, in a remote village, 6 hours out of Cusco. He told his son that he had seen very tall Irish people who were living in the rugged mountains. His father explained that he had seen them in the outskirts of the village, and his father had not been back since 1981, and the archaeology student didn't know if they were still there, so Howe said, well, let's go find out. So they went, and 2 policemen pointed up into the sky and told about a large, round, bright object that had landed on top of one of the mountains. The police say they climbed up there, and if we did too, we would still see the burned oval where the light had landed. The police estimated it would take a day to reach the site. I was tempted, but time was limited, and I wanted to see at least if the tall Irish people were still living in the village. So they went to the village, and they asked. They found a 5'4" man with very blue eyes, and asked if he knew. And he had copper in his hair. He wasn't all redheaded, but he had copper in his hair. And they had been told that his parents were the tall red people. And he said that they were gone. They used to live outside the village, but they'd moved on. And they tried to find anybody who had known them, but it was unsuccessful. But in 1993, a Missouri artist sent Linda Howe a photograph of a humanoid that she had drawn based on the testimony of a man from southwestern Tennessee who had encountered an unusual humanoid during an abduction experience that was similar to the description of the Peruvian. She was 8 feet tall and had long red hair, but she felt kind and loving, and this eyewitness said he didn't feel any threat, but felt very comfortable from her. Okay, so we read that, met the man, talked to him, got the picture. Then there are shorter humanoids with blonde hair, and they can be as tall as 6 feet. So they look kind of Nordic. There's that, and then there's that. And if you remember, they don't look particularly friendly, but if you remember, the comment was made to somebody that the Nordics' goal was our spiritual evolution, and that as opposed to some of the motives of other species. Let's see. Then there's the praying mantis type that can be as tall as 8 feet tall. Oh, God. They're ancient, they're green, they're non-violent, they're genetically engineered by the taller humanoids, possibly. Can't be sure. Oh my God, wait till you see these pictures. Oh my God. If I have to see an ET, I'd rather not see that kind. And then, hang on. Jumping back and forth. Then they're the kind that are kind of lizardy, and they are like 6 foot tall reptiles. One abductee told that they were a genetic experiment to make their species stronger to survive. And here's a picture of one of them. Bigfoot. Let's talk about Bigfoot. The question is asked, here's more reptiles. They're not all identical. So we have this drawing of an experiencer. Remember, they saw this ship and Bigfoot was on the other side. Okay. So there's a lot of reports about Bigfoot, UFO, orbs type, strange lights in the forest type reports. One was shot by a Montana farmer, and when the bullet hit him, it disappeared in a flash of light. And the question is, are these holographs? And I personally say no. I have listened for ages to first-person narratives. There's a podcast, UFO Chronicles. And it's story after story after story, generation after generation after generation of them bringing gifts. I don't think holographs are completely interactive. They trade gifts. People will leave them a donut, and they'll come back and there'll be a pretty stone on a leaf, or there'll be a flower or something. They take things. They eat through garbage cans in some communities. It's is it the Hopa Reservation in California? They have unbelievable number of stories. So then there's the Men in Black, and I hadn't thought about them. There's a feeling that these guys are genetically engineered and that they're a humanoid workforce, and they're very intimidating and very scary. And I think that they are often described as looking a little more human, but maybe not. I don't know. What do I know? Then there are translucent beings, which are balls of light that often contain shadow beings. And there's a picture of what one kid experienced in his bedroom. Oh my God, can you imagine? Can you just imagine experiencing that? So we come to the end, epilogue. And experiencers have been studied at Carleton University in Ottawa in Canada. They've been evaluated mentally. They score as intelligent. They score mentally healthy. And they score personality types not prone to fantasy. And they tell similar stories from all over the world. They've seen UFOs up close. They've seen or communicated with ETs. They've experienced body paralysis in relationship to the abduction experience. They have missing time. They describe being on UFOs. Now, this is all new news when the book was written. And she talks a bit about cloning. And in 93, when she first brought this subject up for the book, cloning was a new thing. This was a big deal when it was first done. And the idea of DNA manipulation was a foreign idea to the public. Remember the role DNA played in, what's his name? O.J. Simpson. It was all new. People didn't know whether it was trustworthy, what to believe. So genetics as a field has just advanced incredibly since this book. The Greys, like I mentioned, are so identical, they're sometimes thought to be clones, which would have been not necessarily occurring to people who saw them in the 60s and 70s and thought they might be robots. So the question she asks again are we test animals? Are we the source of DNA for a threatened species? Or are they trying to preserve us? But ultimately, we come to the issue of a new consciousness, a new awareness. And here's a quote from Dr. Robert Temple, our friend who wrote the book that we covered, A New Science of Heaven, all about plasma physics. It may be difficult for us to avoid seriously entertaining that most disturbing and also exciting of notions, that intelligent beings from elsewhere in the galaxy have already visited Earth, already know of our existence, may possibly be monitoring us at this moment with a robot probe somewhere in our solar system, and it may have the intention of returning in person someday to see how the civilization they established is really getting on. And that's one more Quote from a futurist, a guy who studies potential future events in 1990, "The inescapable profundity of the alien presence has become a source of social pathology in our time. As a culture, we have not yet learned how to tell the truth about something so huge, so strange, so unexpected. Individuals who make an honest effort to deal with it are often discover that their personal stability is at risk. Consequently, the alien presence requires us all to grow, to become stronger and clearer, and to help one another to find our way in a genuinely new world." The end. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it wasn't too fragmented. I had a hard time glossing over stuff we've already done, not missing things. So I hope you enjoyed it, and certainly comments, please, so that we have something to read the cards about. I would like to read cards on this. I think it's an important topic. 3 different but connected issues at hand here. And if you get a chance, go to Earth Files and watch Linda Moulton Howe. Brilliant woman, full of integrity, so interesting, so thorough, great scientific mind, a good writer, and really entertaining, and she's got really beautiful cats. So thank you so much for watching, and have a good rest of your weekend. Slángafoil. Sláinte.